In part 2 for chapter 15, we will talk about the different types of speeches or delivery methods and rehearsing your speech. So 3 different types of speeches or delivery methods. First is impromptu. This is a speech that you're called upon and you may have little to no time to prepare. Say that you're in a meeting and someone asks you to share your thoughts on a project, and you take a few seconds to kind of gather your thoughts and then you start speaking. Scripted speeches are common. Politicians have scripted speeches where they have hired script writers. They will put down the speech word for word, and then often they're read on a teleprompter. Company CEOs may have their communications department or their public relations department write a script for them, and then they will either memorize it or read it word for word when they deliver their scripted speech. Extemporaneous speeches are what you'll be doing in this class. And these are speeches where they are well researched and planned for ahead of time, but the exact wording is not scripted, and it will change from time to time every time you give that speech. You'll have key terms and key words on your note cards, but every time you deliver it, your delivery is going to vary just a little bit. That's an extemporaneous speech. Now, rehearsing is the iterative process of practicing your speech aloud. Iterative process just refers to a series of steps that you repeat, improving and tweaking your speech with each cycle. Basically, it's practice makes perfect. You want to prepare your speaking notes. So you've got your outline completed. You're going to transfer key words, key phrases, and the citations that you use to note cards. And that's what you will use to deliver your speech. Because you only have key terms and phrases, the exact words that you use will vary every time you rehearse it. Okay, let's talk about your presentation aids. First of all, you have to plan when you're going to use a presentation aid in your speech. If you have slides, for example, you may use them throughout your speech. If you have a large poster, you may only refer to it once during your speech. If you have an object that you want to show to your audience, when are you going to do that? So you have to plan when you're going to use each presentation aid. You have to consider your audience needs very carefully. What will they be able to see? You need to make sure that everybody in the audience can see or hear your presentation aid. So when you're rehearsing and when you get into the room to deliver your speech, make sure that the presentation aids and the equipment are where they need to be. So plan for that in advance. And only reveal a presentation aid when you're talking about it. You don't want to have things sitting out on a table and have people wondering what those are. You want to have them hidden until you take them out and you talk about them. And make sure that you talk about whatever the presentational aid is in your speech. And be sure that when you have, let's say that you either have slides, don't talk to your slides, don't look at your slides, don't turn around to the screen when you're delivering your speech. Talk to your audience. If you have a presentation aid or an object in your hand, make sure that while you're holding it up, you are not talking to it. You're talking to the audience, making eye contact with the audience and not with what you have in your hand. Do not send things through the audience. Don't send that object around for people to examine. If you do that, it's very disruptive. People will, be chattering about it. They'll be more focused on when it's going to be their turn to see whatever that interesting thing is. So don't pass it around during your speech. If it's something that you think people want to examine, make it available after your speech. Okay, let's talk about your practice rounds. So on your first practice, well, for all your practices, record yourself. Record yourself with your phone or have somebody record for you because you want to listen to your delivery. You want to look for those vocalized pauses, the ums, okay, and like, things like that. You want to see a video to see what your posture is like, if you're using gestures appropriately. So record every round of practicing that you do. Make sure you go through your outline before you deliver the speech, and then make your note cards that you may use during your speech, and put the outline out of sight. Put it away because you don't want to read from it. You don't want to be tempted to read from it. You want to make sure that you can give the speech using only your note cards. And see if you can, whenever you can, for this particular speech, let me think about this, but I want you to mimic the speech conditions. So if it's possible to rehearse in a classroom, do it. If you see an empty classroom, get in there and start speaking. Start rehearsing. When you begin your rehearsal, write down the time that you begin speaking and when you end to see how long it is. Now, as I said, the analysis, you want to watch your recording, check to make sure that you've covered everything that was in your outline, that your transition statements are smooth, and consider what changes you want to make. Then do a second round of practicing. Then make whatever adjustments you need to do, and then practice a few more times. And I suggest that you do this 3 or 4 days before the speech is due. It is possible to over rehearse. You want to sound spontaneous, and if you have rehearsed too much and you've memorized things, it will sound like you are reciting memorization, and that's not what we want to hear. So it's hard to tell you how many times you should practice. It really depends on so many variables. If you've done other speeches before, you may not need to practice this much. If this is the first time that you have delivered a speech on your own in a classroom, you want to rehearse maybe a few more times. Okay, while you are giving your speech, be aware of and respond to audience feedback. So if people are nodding in agreement, they understand what you're saying, that's great. That's good feedback, keep going. If they look at you though and they all have puzzled expressions on their faces, you might need to go back and explain something again. Use other material if you need to explain a concept. And if you say something that's incorrect and you recognize it, well, just correct yourself. That's fine. Be prepared. Expect the unexpected because things happen. The projector doesn't work. The projector, is working and then it stops. A light blows out. Well, how are you going to react to that? You need to be able to adapt. And, adapt to any unexpected audience reactions. What if they're laughing at something that was not intended to be funny? And what if you do try to be funny and no one thinks it's funny? Well, you're going to have to adapt to that. And then handle questions respectfully. So if someone asks you a question, the very first thing that you do is say, thank them for the question and then repeat it. Because not everyone in the audience will have heard that question. And so if you just respond with your answer, it may not make sense if the people in the back of the room didn't hear the question. So Thank you for your question. If I understand correctly, you want to know why the sky is blue. Well, the sky is blue because, so on and so forth. Adapting your speech for virtual audiences. Well, this is tricky, and we certainly know that more and more is going online and you'll have virtual audiences. So keep in mind that you will have multiple audiences. You may intend to have your speech for fellow students at Jefferson College, but is there a possibility that other people will hear it, someone who's not a student? So you need to make sure that if your speech goes online, that other audiences are considered. You might have different presentation aids. You might have to stick with slides or videos because if you've got a virtual audience, holding up a model may not come through very well. You want to make sure that you are proficient with technology. Moving a class online, everybody had to become familiar with Google Meet pretty quick. And while I'm not an expert, I'm certainly better at it now than I was at the beginning of 2020. And then employ the fundamentals of public speaking. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you're adapting your speech for a virtual audience, basically treat the camera as your audience. Remember your paralanguage, your volume, the rate at which you speak, the rate at which you speak. Think about your body language, your facial expressions, all of that. You'll need all of that for a virtual audience. Now let's move on to evaluating speeches. As you listen to other speeches and as you listen to fellow students give their persuasive speeches in this class, evaluate the content. So did they have good research? Were good sources used? Were the citations correct? Was the organization good? Could you identify, here's the introduction with a preview of points. Here are the points. Was there a conclusion that summarized those points? Did you recognize signposts? For the presentation and the delivery, what kind of language was used? Was the language vivid? Did it paint a picture for you? What about the enthusiasm of the speaker? Did it sound like they were passionate about the particular subject? What kind of posture did the speaker use? What gestures were used? These are all things that you need to consider when you are thinking critically about speeches. And that is the end of Chapter 15.